Hello and welcome. In today's exciting episode, I'll be talking you through pattern matching and the couture techniques you can use to get your jacket looking just right. And the first three, I'll just sort of briefly talk you through, and I'll point you to videos where you can see full step-by-step instructions on each of those techniques. And once you understood those three, then you can sort of grapple with a fourth, which is much more complicated. And yeah, I'll talk you through that one, which is best for a larger cup, so a C or a D cup. All my jackets are made with 3 layers. There's a layer, the outer jacket is tweed. There is a structural layer, which I use netting, and then the lining on all of them is silk, usually silk chamois, but on a couple I've used silk crepe, which is slightly cheaper, not much. Chanel now uses silk crepe, but originally they used silk chamois, which is a little bit heavier and more luxurious, and it lasts longer too, obviously. So yeah, with one of these jackets, you don't particularly have to pattern match. So I tend to just cut out all the all the structural pieces, all the netting, and all the tweed just in one go. So first I cut out the netting, and then I lay my tweed on the workbench, just double it over. So you can see the back of this gold one is quite silver, and I've just doubled them over with the salvages matching on the edge. And then you just lay all your pattern pieces on top and carefully cut them out, and you sew them up. That's very effective for just a plain one, or one where you're not really that fastidious about pattern matching. And there'll be a card linked above to just show you an entire video on how to make one of a tweed jacket that way. The next technique takes a little longer, but not that much. Basically, with this one, this plaid is very obvious. You can see the white lines from a mile away in this red plaid. And so I wanted to make sure that they sort of matched right across the front of the jacket and over to the arms. And as you can see, it turned out pretty well. So I'll show you the technique I used for this one. Instead of just doubling over your fabric and cutting both the left and the right side at once, if your pattern is quite obvious and you can absolutely tell if this is mismatched, what you can do is you can just buy twice as much fabric and then spend about 10 minutes pattern matching the two sides. So this tweed is more like a tartan, and the pattern is very obvious, so it's kind of important that it matches up at the seams. So what you can do with this one is, well, if I was making it, I would just not double it over at all and cut each piece individually. But what a dressmaker does, because they feel like it saves a little bit of time, is they double over the fabric, and then they spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so just matching up every single, well, they match up about a dozen different points. So that's where the white and the dark red intersect in the top right corner of a square. And so they'll flip it over and find the exact same spot on the other layer of fabric, and they'll pin them, and then they'll go along and they'll do it, in a dozen different places, and then they'll smooth it out, and then they'll cut all the pieces two at once so that the left and the right side are mirrors of each other. So that is one way of doing it, but I personally find it easier to just cut out all the pieces of the structural layer. So cut out all the netting. Okay, so here are all our netting pieces cut out. And now I'll just lay out the tweed. So here we have the plaid all laid out. So instead of using tissue paper pattern pieces, I'm actually using the structural layer as my pattern pieces to cut around. And I do this because the netting is pretty see-through, so you can get an exact idea of what each piece is going to look like. So you can see that all the pattern pieces are going to match simply because of the way you've put them on. So that's the front center, front side, and then I've got these sleeves down here, and the undersleeve is matching the oversleeve. And yeah, if you want to see a full, and then of course once you're happy with the placement of each piece, then you can finally pin them and cut them. Then it's pretty easy to just stitch them all together. So yeah, I really like this method, and if you want to see a full video in this, then the making of the red plaid jacket, I'll put a card up in the top right corner and you can click on that. Next we have, as much as I like this method that I used for the red plaid, you do still end up with a visible line between the two panels. So you can tell that if you look closely, or you aren't great at pattern matching, you can still tell that there's, like, this jacket has a 4-piece front, 2 on that side and 2 on that side. So if you want an even more invisible way of pattern matching, then we have what I did on this jacket here and also on the green Gucci. With these ones, they look like they pattern match perfectly because the structural layer, the netting, was cut as 2 parts, but the actual outer layer, they're each just cut as 1 bit. It's quite obvious on the Gucci one. You cannot see a seam. And this works particularly well for an A and a B cup, like someone with a small chest, because when you have small chest, your shoulder blades actually stick out more than out the back than your chest does out the front. So with this method, you're losing your princess seams, your seams down the front, but you're keeping them in the back. So the bit where you need princess seams is still there. So yeah, I'll show you. Okay, it's a little hard to see the seams, but you can see that there you go. If I follow them, you can see that they still have seams in the back. So when you put your hands in your pocket or put your elbows out and your hands up, then your shoulder blades will stick out, or when you're putting your jacket on and off. And there's still plenty of room for that in the back. So your jacket will always fit perfectly. So yeah, I quite like this method. It is a little time consuming, but it works really well, and particularly if you have a flat chest. But I mean, this is an unbuttoned jacket, so if you wear, you've probably seen photos of Beyonce wearing a Chanel jacket. She tends to wear one 2 sizes too small, and not 2 full sizes. It's a snug fitting jacket, but what I mean by that is she has a big chest, but she wears a B cup, a jacket to fit a B cup, so you could never button it up fully, but I mean, it's still a beautiful jacket, and it fits perfectly in the arms and the sleeve, arms and the shoulders, and you get, you know, a perfect pattern match as well. But you just could never do it up. But it's a jacket without buttons, so you never would. So yeah, if I had a large chest, then I would just make a B-cup version of my size and wear it that way with a t-shirt or plain shirt underneath. But that's just me. So yeah, I'll quickly show you this technique. So to make a jacket using this technique, you still cut out all your netting pieces, your structural layer, but instead of placing them straight away, all the pieces on your plaid or on your tweed, what you do first is you sew the front 2 panels together. So I have pinned my front center and front side panels together. I'm just doing one side just to show you, and just ignore the tweed for the moment. I can't, my workbench is white so you couldn't see it, so that's why I've got the tweed behind it. So now we will sew these two bits of backing fabric together with the machine. Okay, I have machine sewn them. Now I need to hand stitch down the seam allowance so that I have one whole flat piece to work with. First you go along and pin down all the seam allowance, and once that's done you hand sew. I think I'll use probably a fluoro orange or a fluoro yellow thread just so that you can see what I'm doing. There we go. Now I've done hand stitched down the seam allowance. So my front piece is one entire piece. Some people will be wondering why not just cut out one piece of backing. It's not completely flat. There is a bit of depth in the chest area, but yeah, I feel like it's important to cut your structural layer as two pieces with a princess seam. But if you are completely flat, then I guess cut it out as one piece, but it's not something I would recommend. I definitely think it's worth cutting out the two pieces and stitching them together. And then basically you lay down all the pieces, you stretch out your fabric carefully, one layer of the tweed, and you place each of your pieces on it. And yeah, pinning this down does take a little bit longer because you basically have to mold it as you pin. But I'll lay out the bit of tweed and I'll place the pieces and I'll sort of show you what I mean. So once you've placed all your pieces and pattern match them, it becomes a bit more obvious that there's excess volume that you sort of carefully have to smooth out. So what I do is I pin from the middle and just gently mold the piece into shape. Generally what it takes is you sort of have to push the fabric down a little bit, and you end up adding a little bit more tweed into the middle. And yeah, if you want to see a full version of it, I'll put a card in the top right corner I'll put a card to the bubblegum and blue one, and then once that card is timed out, I'll put the card to the Gucci green one, and you can see how I pinned and pinned the structural layer to the tweed layer and then cut them out and made them in those two videos. But basically what you're doing is you pin one in the center, pin in the very center, and then you sort of pin one below and then one above, and you sort of smooth as you go. And yeah, usually I take a couple of times to get it exactly right. And I mean, if you make a jacket well, you have it the rest of your life. So taking an extra 15 or 20 minutes to pin the two, like the left front piece and the right front piece, and make sure that they are still matching the side pieces. It's annoying and it's frustrating, and you have to be super careful, but it's so completely worth it. So yeah, that's how you do that. And next we will move on to pattern matching for a B or a D or a C cup. So what I think I'll do is just take this piece here and add a dart to it. So this is an A or B cup. It's pretty flat, and now we'll add a dart in the side. Now, yes, I know this is not how you make a piece for a side piece for a D or a C cup, but we get the same effect because we now have quite a substantial difference between the side piece and the front piece, and that allows the extra volume for the bust. So as you can see, you can't just Whereas with the A and the B cup, you could just lay it flat and go from there. With this one, you can't really do that. So what I'll do is I'll just stitch in that dart so that we have a proper piece of structural layer to work with. Okay, so here we have, I've stitched that dart in and we have a pretty decent idea of the difficulties of pattern matching on a larger bust size. First of all, when you're pretty flat in the front, then it's easy to get a pattern match right from your top right down to the bottom, whereas with a larger bust size, it sort of pulls out everything. So it's even difficult to, like, if you try and pattern match right across the bottom of your jacket, then you throw out absolutely everything else and you end up sort of, yeah, really off kilter. So what you can do is, if you're absolutely determined to do it the Chanel way, well, I hate to break it to you, but Chanel jackets, the ready-to-wear ones, and almost all of the haute couture ones don't actually have a structural layer. You're probably thinking of a Dior jacket. There are a couple of Chanel jackets where they've had to have a structural layer just so that they could pattern match the entire jacket. And what they've done on those particular jackets is they made the structural layer and then they pinned it to the dress form. If you're a couture client, there's only like 2,000 women in the entire world who are rich enough to get handmade clothes from Dior and Chanel and places like that. So each of those clients have their own dress form that fits them. And what they do is they take the client's measurements and they cut out the structural layer and they pin it to the dress form. I've used pearl tip pins so you can actually see what I'm doing, but they would use dressmakers pins, you know, the ones that are little and they go right in. So yeah, you'd pin it completely. So you also have to do the side there. And once you've done that, so that the structural layer of your jacket is basically like a second skin on your dress form, then you would drape your tweed over it and just do both the fronts and get them perfect. And yeah, this way takes up so much tweed, and tweed is incredibly expensive. It's okay for Chanel because the company that owns Chanel also owns Lesage, where the super expensive tweed comes from. So, and they have to use up a certain amount of Lesage tweed in each collection. So it's fine for them if they're wasting the world's most expensive tweed. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend this method. If I wanted to make this up into a jacket and I had like a C or a D cup, I would go back to the drawing board. I wouldn't use my normal pattern, which is a 7975, because that has a princess seam. And yeah, I probably go for a different jacket. I'll show you some different ones. To know what to look for on your patterns, then you really need to know the difference between a dart and a princess seam. Bianca from the Closet Historian recently did a video explaining the difference between darts and princess seams. Essentially, a dart is where you fold under the excess fabric around the bust or the tummy bulge, and a princess seam is where you cut out that excess fabric and you end up with two pieces. And yeah, just check out her video if you need further clarification. As I said, my go-to pattern is the Vogue 7975 with the princess seam, mostly because the back also has a princess seam, and when you have one with darts, they tend to just not have that in the back. And because I have the bony shoulder blades, I really need a princess seam in the back. But if you have a larger bust, then that's not really an issue, so you can go for any pattern you want. Now tend to solve the problem of pattern matching by hiding it behind a pocket. So this has got a princess side seam or a dart from the bottom, and then the pattern mismatch is just covered by a pocket. And there's also the other ones where they just divide the jacket into 3 horizontally. This method is probably a little advanced for most people, but there are definitely patterns that cater for this style. As you can see with this Vogue vintage pattern, they've sort of essentially cut the jacket into, well, they've turned it into a coat, but they've cut the bodice of it into 3, and the top still has a bit of a dart, but there's one section, the mid section, and then the full bottom section. So yeah, you could sort of contrast or pattern, find a way to pattern match using that type of pattern. But I think the other method is much easier for most people. With the majority of Chanel tweeds where they've pattern matched, they just patch a pocket over it. And what this means is you have freedom to use basically any pattern and just put a pocket over any mismatch in the plaid. The important thing about putting your pocket on is to notice how high it is and how it's basically nestled right under the sleeve, and that way you never see any of the mismatch part of the pattern. So I'll talk you through a range of different patterns. A lot of the Chanel style jackets are a princess seam. Oh, you can't actually see on the front of that one. So yeah, if you're on the Something Delightful website, just scroll down to under the picture and it will tell you, and click on style lines or line art, and you'll be able to see what type of jacket it is much more easily just from the lines. So see, a traditional princess seam goes from up on the shoulder right down, whereas a side style princess seam goes from the side, the sleeve, and it goes down from there, not from the top. I prefer this cut, but people with a larger bust often prefer this type. So Berta does a lot of the side style princess seam, and that is because your seam that runs right down the jacket is almost under the arm and on the side. It's basically not visible when you're wearing the jacket, so you can't actually see that they have seams in their jackets. They just look like flat fronted ones, all in one cut, all in one piece. So if you put a small breast pocket on either side of the front of that one, you would not see any mismatch in your, even if you had a really loud tweed like this one. Whereas if you had a traditional princess seam, then you can see quite clearly where those seams are matching up and where your pattern would mismatch. And then I have some other Vogue ones. That's the tricky seams and darts. So yeah, that seems super advanced to me. So I probably wouldn't give that a go if you haven't made a jacket before. But I mean, you do you. If you want a challenge, that's definitely a challenge. This one has a side stye, but it goes into a more central seam. So yeah, I think it'd be quite noticeable, especially at the bottom of your jacket. So maybe avoid one like that and go for one that's more on the side, if you see what I mean. And then there's, this one's pretty much a flat fronted jacket, and it has a dart under the arm. That would be very easily covered with a pocket. I'm going to make jacket E eventually, because I just think that's a nice, clean, simple lines and nice pattern. The only thing that concerns me about this pattern is that there's only one seam in the back. So yeah, as someone who needs room for her shoulder blades, that is a little concerning for me, but it just means that it'll be a little bit baggier on me. But I think if you have a bigger chest, this might be a really good option because you're more worried about fitting on the front than on the back. This one looks easily modifiable, and it has a slight collar, and again it only has a center back seam at the top, but that would be pretty easy to pattern match with, in my opinion. And then we have the Gucci one. Well, it's Chanel-ish, Gucci-ish type one, and that it's actually got darts coming up from the bottom, so it's sort of half a princess seam, half dart. And that might be a little confusing to some, but it would be easy to pattern match with that, because the bit where the pattern match or a pattern mismatch is most noticeable is the chest and the top, so between the neck, the collar and the shoulder. And yeah, you'd have a clean pattern on it for those parts. So yeah, that might be an option that you think is good for you. It's really about what suits your needs. And then Simplicity, McCall's and Butterick often do darts rather than princess seam, and they tend to people with a larger chest size, like a C or a D cup, tend to really like these ones. I like Vogue just because they do a good flat-chested pattern, but you know, each their own. Definitely find the house style that suits you. But yeah, there's also some really nice Simplicity Vintage has a nice princess seam arm style, so it goes from the arm rather than the top. And if that's the silhouette you're going for, then you can obviously just put pockets over those. And this one has a dart. That's pretty basic, but it might be a bit too cropped for some. And then that's more of a coat, but those jackets are doing an A-line jacket might be a good way to sort of, you de-emphasize the bust, and therefore you give yourself a roomier jacket, but it's also a really classic silhouette. And yeah, if you're trying to pattern match for the first time, maybe one of those vintage jackets would be good. And the construction would be quite simple, well, relatively simple. So I'd give that a go if I was trying to pattern match for the first time. So yeah, just sort of pick a pattern that suits your needs, and then sort of slap a pocket on, and just as long as your pocket is sort of high and nestled almost under the sleeve, then yeah, it will look very Chanel-ish. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and good luck pattern matching your Chanel style tweed jacket. It is definitely a pain trying to match those patterns, but it's absolutely worth it. So yeah, just remember to take your time, and yeah, you'll end up with an absolutely gorgeous tweed jacket.